This program is brought to you by Emory University.
Before I begin, I must seek your apology because although I'm supposed to talk on the topic assessing the flow of information, providing a window into Tibet, but despite my many attempts, despite my many endeavors, I will not be able to provide you a window. The only thing I will do is I will be providing you a few peeks into Tibet because the condition is so that you really cannot expect to actually have a window into Tibet today. It truly is closed. Today, March 26, is personally for me a significant day. Being the editor of Pail.com, as mentioned earlier, I have been reporting on self-immolations, all 111 of them, and it frustrates you at times. It makes you angry because you really cannot do much. You have just a phone call, you contact people, you try to know of the situation, you report on it, and that's it, and people forget. So last year on March 26, I decided to go to New Delhi, the Indian capital, and take part in a major rally that was being organized. I just sort of leave from my office and said, okay, this day I'm going to go down, I'm going to take part in a protest and relieve myself in some way. So I was in Delhi, and it was the protest was organized because in a few days the BRICS summit was going was coming up. BRIC, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and Hu Jintao, the then president of China, he was coming to New Delhi. So I went for this protest rally, and I'll show you a picture of a Burning Man. So if you don't want to look at it, please turn away. But the reality is so that we have to look at it. This is March 26, exactly 1 year back in New Delhi. Jambe Ishila ran just 2 feet away from me. We were participating in the rally. I was looking up at the stage. Someone was speaking. I was lauding. And then all of a sudden, we could hear shrieks, and the crowd went berserk. And then this young man came running out. And he fell on the ground, and there was nothing much left of him. I had a little water in my hands because we were shouting, so they gave us some water. I tried to sprinkle it on his body, but it was not enough. Similarly, what we all are trying to do here is not enough to solve the situation inside Tibet. But nevertheless, just before coming here, I was in New Delhi again because I had to fly from New Delhi, and I met one of his relatives. One of his very few relatives, in fact, in India, and I've met him, and I asked how he was doing and how his family members, Jambe Ishila's family members in Tibet, he has a mother and a sister, how they were doing. I inquired with the relative, and he said for the past 1 year he has not even called once because he feared of repercussions, because he feared that they will land into more trouble, the family members there in Tibet. So this gives you an idea how people are scared, how strict, how cruel the regime is right now inside Tibet. Okay, so let me first give you just a general idea. I'm sorry if I'm repetitive. This is the map of Tibet. It is 2.5 million square kilometers, not that small. But now what China has done after occupying Tibet is they have bifurcated the original historic land of Tibet into 5 different areas and incorporated them into different Chinese provinces like the Central Tibet, Tibetan Autonomous Region, and Amdo has been incorporated into Shanghai province, and a few areas of Amdo have been incorporated into Gannan, Gansu province, and then the major part of Kham into Sichuan, Ngaba also into Sichuan, and then a little part of Kham down there south, Dechen into Yunnan province. So this is how, when you talk about Tibet, I'm talking about the entire Tibet and not just what China says, the Tibetan Autonomous Region. So, as I said earlier, I will only be able to provide you peeks into Tibet. And why that is because inside Tibet, as of now, there is no international representation at all, be it media, be it diplomatic. The last time China took the courage of inviting foreign media inside Tibet, this happened. This is in 2008, right after the major protests that erupted inside Tibet, one of the biggest protests since 1959. And after they quelled the protest, after they arrested people, after they killed around 200 Tibetans, that is the reserved number, they said, now it should be okay, so we'll let us have a few media delegation come into Tibet. And they took them to Jokang, which is the holiest shrine in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet. And these monks were supposed to be tamed, supposed to be indoctrined. And the media started asking questions to them, and then they cried out. They said, Tibet is not free, Tibet is not free. That was the reaction. So since then, since 2008, no international media has been able to step foot into Tibet. A few of them have happened, and we'll talk about it later. And also recently, we came to know that Canada, Australia, they have all sought permissions. The ambassadors have sought permission to visit Tibet, but everything has been denied. Reporters Without Frontiers, RSF, one of the major global groups observing media freedom in the world, they came out with a report last year saying that Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, is worse than Pyongyang, the capital of North Korea. And they said they based their argument saying that out of sight of the world, a major crisis is unfolding. Even Pyongyang has an international media presence, which is not the case in Lhasa. Beijing is trying to restrict all communication between the region and the rest of the world. Total media blackout imposed by Chinese authorities in Tibet, preventing all media coverage of the ongoing wave of self-immolations and mass demonstrations in the region. And they even went to the extent of saying that reporters have complained of being followed, others that have been escorted to the airport by the police, questioned for several hours, forced to wipe the pictures they have taken, and had their equipment seized. And we are talking about reporters from CNN, BBC. These guys, they attempted to go inside Tibet, but they were caught, they were manhandled, they were even threatened that their visas will be cancelled. So this is the situation inside Tibet as far as media representation is concerned. Now, okay, when you're talking about flow of information, let us first go into, is there any flow of information inside Tibet? Like I've showed you in the first slide, the map, that Tibet has been bifurcated into 5 different zones. Now, inside Tibet, the reality right now is that for a Tibetan to visit Tibetan areas, that individual needs at least 4 or 5 different kinds of permits to go travel inside Tibet. So on the right side of the screen, you see some documents that are all in Chinese, of course. These are documents that you're required if you need to travel inside Tibet, for a Tibetan I'm talking. And on the left side, you see a photo of Tibetans being scrutinized and asked about their documents right in the street of Lhasa, the capital. And if you don't have your required documents, you will be thrown out of Tibet or worse, land in a jail. Woeser, the famous blogger who was recently awarded by the US State Department as the Courageous Woman Award for this year, she writes in one of her blogs that Tibetans need permit to enter Tibet, and these permits are like you have to have your ID card with you, you have to fill up a form saying where you want to go. Like when I came into America, I was given a form and told to write down where I will be visiting, the numbers that phone numbers provide. So I had to all write down, because yeah, I am an alien, I'm coming into America, so maybe the security requires me to write those details. But for a Tibetan person from Eastern Tibet to go into Tibet, Central Tibet, you need to fill out a form saying where you'll be going, what address you'll be staying at, reason for your trip, and then of course you have to give your fingerprints and biometrics. So this actually is what is happening inside Tibet. So Human Rights Watch, one of, again, the global rights group, it came out with a report in June 2012 saying that several hundred Tibetans from eastern areas of the Tibetan Plateau who live in Lhasa, the capital of Tibet, have been arbitrarily expelled as part of a drastic security drive. That is the drastic security I've been talking about, of expelling Tibetan people outside, Tibetan people who don't belong to Central Tibet. They are being expelled, and those who are trying to enter, they are being obstructed. This arbitrary expulsion of people because of their ethnicity or place of birth is clearly discriminatory and violates their basic rights to freedom of movement and residence. This is what Human Rights Watch says. Recently, a friend of mine, a very good friend of mine, he was able to visit Tibet. That after almost 20 years. As a child, he had come to study in Dharamshala, in the same school that I studied. By the time he went back this year, it was just last month in February, his parents had passed away. He couldn't get to see the face of his parents, but then his brother and sister were there, and so he briefly was able to visit Tibet for almost like 20 days. And he tells me that his village, where he stayed, is just 30 minutes away from Lhasa, the capital city. And for every Tibetan from his village to go to Lhasa, there are 2 checkposts. On the 30-minute road, there are 2 checkposts. You have to get out of your car and you have to show your ID, identification. There's one small ID card that the Chinese government provides called Xinfantan. And if you don't have that, either you'll get arrested or you have to go back from where you came from. It depends on the person who's stopping you. So in the 20 days he stayed in his village, just half an hour away from Lhasa, he was only able to go to Lhasa twice. And that also for official purposes, like to register your paper. He wasn't allowed to go on pilgrimage to Lhasa. He wasn't allowed to go shopping in Lhasa, because this is how you are being treated if you are Tibetan inside Tibet. So again, talking about the restrictions inside Tibet and the flow of information, China came up with this new system called Skynet, as it suggests, a camera on every road in Tibet. This is the aim that they want to achieve. Telegraph, the UK newspaper, reported last year that an invasive surveillance system, a camera network known as Skynet, may have a camera on every road in Tibet. These are not for traffic or for your security. These are to monitor the movement of Tibetan people, I must say. Officials at the 18th Party Congress, which was held in November last year, claimed that the Skynet network has divided the region into a closely monitored grid and that teams of security personnel can be mobilized within 2 minutes to put an end to the suicide attempts, what they call the self-immolation. So this is how the restrictions that are going on inside Tibet. Here, you can see pictures of, on the right side is a pile of burning satellite dishes, and on the left side you can see satellite dishes being carried away. This is in eastern Tibet. January 2013, as well as in December 2012, the Chinese government, to restrict the information inside Tibet, what they did was they confiscated all those satellite dishes. Those satellite dishes are being used to receive radio broadcasts from America, like the Voice of America, like Radio Free Asia. But because the Chinese government does not want you to listen to the real information, what they did was they confiscated hundreds and hundreds, not just a few, thousands of satellite dishes, carried them away, bundled them, burned them. And instead, they gave you other devices, like this one. I've intentionally blocked an area on which there's a specific serial number to each of those boxes. I don't know what these boxes are, but then these look very proficient because you can connect it to a telephone, you can connect it to internet, you can connect to a TV. People suspect that this is a monitoring device, and these are being distributed free instead of the satellite dishes that they've taken away. So this is kind of the repressions they're trying to implement. So my friend, when he was in Lhasa, he was in Tibet for 20 days. When he came back, I asked him, "Did you get to listen to any international news? Did you hear anything about the outside world?" Because in February there were many important things happened, like the Pope resigned, North Korea did a nuclear thing, Syria was it was very serious inside Syria, and there's Oscar Pistorius, this guy who with the sprinter, he got charged with murder for his girlfriend. Okay, many things happen out in the outside world. And more importantly for the Tibetan people, right next door in Kathmandu, Nepal, a monk set himself on fire. 25-year-old Drupchen Siring on February 13. So I asked him, did you get to hear anything about the outside world? And he said, yes, he heard only one thing, and that one thing is, well, your guess is as good as mine, the Russian meteor. That was the only news, outside news, that he heard inside Tibet for 20 days. So you can assume. All right, so, and also recently I met a few Tibetans who had come from the westernmost part of Tibet. The westernmost region of Tibet. They had come to India to receive teachings, and then they were not allowed to go back. So they were forced to stay in Dharamshala. I went to them, I spoke to them for some time, and then I asked them whether they had heard anything about the self-immolations. That's just 1 month back I asked them, and they said they had heard nothing about Tibet self-immolations. They come from Tibet, they live in Tibet, but they have heard nothing about self-immolation. The only thing they heard was when they came into Nepal, escaped into Nepal, they heard about the self-immolations. I asked them again, did they hear anything about the 2008 protests, widespread protests inside Tibet? They said they heard a little bit of it, but nothing at all. So that is kind of the structure that you have inside Tibet on restrictions on flow of information inside Tibet. Okay, now let us talk about the flow of information from Tibet to outside Tibet. The very few channels available are that the first one would be the flow of actual people coming out of Tibet, people walking over the Himalayas and coming to India, coming for exile or coming for education, coming for religious purposes, talking with them, interacting with them, and knowing the situation. That is one of the most, I think, effective and efficient forms of flow of information. But of late, those numbers have drastically fallen. Before 2008, I say 2008 because of the huge protests that happened in 2008. Before 2008, 3,500 people was the average amount of Tibetans coming each year out of Tibet to either to study here, to study here in a monastery or in a school or for a pilgrimage. But last year, only 350 odd people came out of Tibet. Not because they were too happy living inside Tibet, but because the situation is so, the condition is so that you cannot escape out of Tibet. That is one point. And China, since last year, they began this new process of confiscating passports, Chinese passports. So obviously, if you don't have a passport, then you will not be able to travel. So they have confiscated many of those passports. They said that they will be giving you new ones, but then they have not provided till now. Okay, I have to breeze through now because I don't have much time. Hu Jintao, the former president, he said at an internal speech on Tibet in March 2002 that stability overrides everything in Tibet. So you have to maintain that stability, keep a tight hand on the struggle against separatism, overall coverage of internet management in towns, in rural areas, strengthening the management of new media. Likewise, the party secretary, means the Chinese boss of Tibet, Chen Gunkao, in June 2012, he said, make sure that no voices and images of enemy forces and Dalai clique can be heard or seen inside Tibet. That is, okay. So Human Rights Watch last year again said that restrictions on new media and communication in Tibet have been stepped up, cut off Tibetans in China from news, and also to prevent the views of the Tibetan leader, the Dalai Lama, and his followers from reaching Tibetans inside China, particularly those living in rural areas. Significantly increased controls on internet use, text messages, phone ownership, music publishing, and photocopying. All these are new restrictions placed inside Tibet, coming after those large wave of self-immolations. Now, being particular about the restrictions on internet, because internet is, of course, one of those major modes from which we get information from Tibet. By July 2012, you must be carrying the second generation ID cards which can be swiped in the machine. If you don't have that, you don't have internet access inside Tibet. CCTVs are installed in all cyber cafes. The Reporters Without Borders said that since January 2004, internet and cell phone network severely disrupted within a radius of 50 kilometers from Setar. I'm giving you an example of how quickly they can react. If there is something going on, 50-kilometer radius, you are blanked out. No information goes in, no information comes out. China even blocked the New York Times, Al Jazeera. You must be knowing about all those things. So website of Tibetan exile media, for example, my media cannot be accessed. My website cannot be accessed inside Tibet. Restrictions on phone lines. Of course, phone line, one other very important mode of seeking information. Since 2008, all landline conversations are being taped. That is official. I met a friend of mine who has a friend inside Tibet. His job is to listen to taped conversations, and he told him that the job really sucks. But so he ignores those grave points, and he listens to boys and girls chatting on the phone, just to show that he is doing some work. Text messages are being screened. In 2008, a Tibetan tour guide was jailed for 3 years because he sent something that the government did not approve of. Cellular phones, March 2013, this very month, what is happening right now in Lhasa is that a special team of experts on cell phone technology arrived from Beijing. They are scanning all phones of Tibetan monks beginning from the Drepung monastery. Like our monks are from Drepung. So after that, they'll be followed by, or they'll be going around all the monasteries and they'll be scanning the cell phones, seeing that whether you have ever contacted anyone outside Tibet. And if you do, then you'll suffer. Anyways, okay, now I'll give you examples. Like Tamdingel, these 4 Tibetans, they were arrested in December 2012 for having pictures of the Dalai Lama on their cell phone. Ngawang Tobde, another student, he was arrested in October 2012 for storing images of Tibet, self-immolations, and banned Tibetan flag. And he was charged of being a reactionary, inciting the public and threatening social stability if you store a picture of the Dalai Lama on your phone. So as Kon Lobsang spoke about the criminalization of the self-immolations, what is now happening is that since December, they said that the Supreme Court, along with the police, said that you will be charged with intentional murder if you assist or if you abet self-immolations. So following those instructions, a lot of even stricter restrictions have come up inside Tibet. For example, in September 2012, Thubdor, 25, sentenced to 7.5 years in prison, and Lobsang Tashi, 26 years old, to 7 years for making contacts with outsiders. Just for calling up and telling that today a self-immolation happened, you'll land up for 7.5 years in jail. Another example, this is Hlo Yonde Gyatso, a senior monk. He was sentenced for sharing pictures and information on one self-immolator called Tenzin Wangmo. He was charged for sharing information since 2008 about political events in Tibet by attempting to make telephone calls to human rights mechanisms of the UN. You're contacting UN and you'll land up in jail. So another example, now I'm rushing through. In January, just early this year, 8 Tibetans, including a family member of a self-immolator, arrested for sharing information, having contacts with outside splittist forces. Splittist forces is what China calls the followers of the Dalai Lama in exile. And more recently, Yumkyap, 25, arrested for storing pictures of the March 2000 uprising in Tibet on his phone and allegedly contacting a Tibetan journalist in exile. It says journalist in exile. So this is how you are being treated. Now I spoke about inside Tibet, there is no information flow. Outside Tibet, there was flow earlier, but it is now being restricted. If you call up someone in exile, you land up in jail for 7 to 10 years, so you will not risk that. As a reporter who seeks information from inside Tibet, I have first-hand knowledge now that earlier we at least used to receive information on a daily basis, maybe a few hours later, maybe if not the case, maybe 24 hours later, but right now it is getting more and more difficult seeking information. And we also are very scared. We don't want to risk the lives of people inside Tibet. I have few numbers to call up, but those numbers are not working these days. I don't know. I don't know whether they have been arrested. I don't know whether they have switched off their phones. I don't know, but these numbers are not working anymore. So on our part as well, it's really scary. The flow of information, as I began by saying, I can only provide you peaks because there is no flow of information. I go back to where I begin. Jambe Ishila, he, before dying, left a handwritten letter in Tibetan. He had 5 points. And I would like to end by reading one of those last words that he wrote. What I want to convey here is the concern of the 6 million Tibetans. At a time when we are making our final move toward our goal, if you have money, it is the time to spend it. If you are educated, it is the time to produce results. If you have control over your life, I think the day has come to sacrifice your life. The fact that Tibetan people are setting themselves on fire in this 21st century is to let the world know about their suffering and to tell the world about the denial of basic human rights. If you have any empathy, stand up for the Tibetan people. Thank you very much.
The preceding program is copyrighted by Emory University.